This is the story of the no ball that changed the game.
We've got a change of bowling now. This could be crunch time because Muralidharan is coming on to bowl.
It's January the 23rd, 1999, and England are playing Sri Lanka in a Carlton and United one-day game at the Adelaide Oval. Everyone seems to know that something is about to happen which will make the game of cricket front-page news.
Well, we knew about it. We heard it, as everyone did. It was the talk of the town.
Leading into the game, there had been big whispers, noisy whispers, that this was the game when Murali was going to be called for throwing.
There'd been a fair amount of chat beforehand, and it was even raised in a team meeting before the match in Adelaide. Suggestions in the media that Ross Emerson, who I think had called Muralidharan back on a tour in 95-6 in Australia, was going to call him again. That was all the talk in the papers in the week leading up to that match in Adelaide.
The man at the centre of the row was Sri Lankan off-spinner Mutiah Muralidharan. Right from the moment he'd made his international debut in August 1992, there'd been controversy over his unique
We first came across Muralidharan back on the 92-93 tour to India when we went to Sri Lanka at the end of that, and Muralidharan played in that game in Colombo and got this tremendous amount of spin and turn and bounce, along with another bowler, Warnawera, who was bowled much quicker off a longer run-up, but also did exactly the same, bowled really quick off-cutters that were hitting players in the chest. And England there with those two dangerous finger spinners, Tufnell and Embry, weren't getting the ball above the knee roll. And it was two different games of cricket, and we felt that both players at that time were bowling illegally.
There was a lot of doubt about the action, and when you coach, you've got to box clever. You've got to be very careful about what you're saying, and I would say at that time, as I did, I'd try to choose my words really carefully, he's unorthodox.
For 3 years, despite the doubts and the mutterings, there was no official intervention as Muralidharan embarked on a one-man wicket rampage, sending batsman after batsman on his way, as Sri Lanka, now with a serious cutting edge, became a side to be feared on any surface. In the winter of 1995, though, on a tour to Australia, Darrell Hare called him for throwing in the Boxing Day Test, and 10 days later, umpire Ross Emerson did the same in a one-day game in Brisbane. Reluctant to lose their prime wicket-taking asset and convinced that his action was legal, Sri Lanka sent Muralidharan to the University of Hong Kong, where after extensive testing, biomechanics said that he was fine and that the apparent throw was in fact an optical illusion allied to a birth defect which prevented him straightening his arm. The ICC were convinced, and Murali was free again to continue giving batsmen nightmares. By January 1999, he'd taken 203 test wickets and 139 in one-dayers, as for the first time since the Hare-Emerson no-balling, Sri Lanka returned to Australia. And while Hare wasn't appointed to stand in any of their games, Emerson was.
I'd had a meeting with Bob Merriman, who was the chairman of the Umpires Selection Committee, who later became the chairman of the Australian Cricket Board. And I had a conversation with him over a number of issues, and at the end of it he said to me, he said, "When's your next game?" I said, "Oh, in Adelaide, next week." He said, "Oh, which game have you got?" I said, "Oh, England and Sri Lanka." He said, "Ah, that's right, yes." He said, "Well, you've set yourself fairly high standards in certain aspects of the game. We expect you to uphold those standards." Him to be called.
Once the man has called you, and he's not going to step and say he's right. So I was prepared.
To start with, the game was uneventful. England batted first and through Stewart and Knight got off to a positive start. Then, in the 16th over of the game, Arjuna Ranatunga gave Murali the nod. It was time for him to have a bowl, and the cricketing world held its breath.
We'd basically tried to block it out and say, well, let's just play the game, but it's quite hard to do because there's a sort of wider, bigger issue going to take place. I remember the game I was batting with Graham Hick at the time, and he came on to bowl, and I remember saying to Graham, "This is it, game over," because I thought it would be such a big impact at the time. We'd all walk off and there'd be a huge furore and resolved afterwards. So he came on, he bowled the first, I think it was the first over, if not the first few balls. And I remember just playing out and playing out and playing out and looking at square leg, no call again, no call, and thinking, well, it's all a big fuss about nothing. Nothing's going to happen.
You remember the dressing rooms are side on at the Adelaide Oval, so you can see everything that's happening, actions and whatever else. They're small side on boundaries, so you're pretty close to the play. Yeah, everyone was in the viewing room watching, waiting. Is he going to call him? Is he not? First over went by, and it's, oh well, perhaps it's all mouth and trousers. And then the fourth ball of the second over, 10th ball of his spell. Out came the arm, shout and no ball.
We've got a no ball at square leg here.
Then I asked him straight away, what for, is it a front foot? No, he said, no, you're throwing. Then I went to the Arjuna and said, he's saying he's throwing again.
Seems to me that it's all come back to haunt Murali. He's no-balled him for throwing.
Then Arjuna went and spoke to him. Then I was avoid and I went. I was very upset and I was just moved away from there. And Arjuna was arguing with him.
That's the time we all realized he's going after Murali. And that's the time we all had to get together. And I went and spoke to him. Then he said it's the chucking issue.
I just somehow recall Arjuna saying that I'm running this game, and Emerson saying, no, you're not, I'm running it. And there was this standoff between them.
And this could have very, very far-reaching consequences.
The law actually states that if either umpire be not entirely satisfied with the absolute fairness of the delivery, he should call and signal no ball.
I was shocked at the time, and again I have to go through this, like 95 event, and what's happening again, because I have bowled everywhere in the world and nobody has questioned me, and again it's happening. So I just stood like, and Arjuna said, we had not a plan basically, something happened, Arjuna will take over the control because he's the captain, he can.
So I never wanted to get angry, I never wanted to show the public a major issue, but ultimately if I didn't show this case, it should have been a disaster for Murali.
As soon as this happened, I told myself, gosh, am I dreaming? I mean, it's happened. And I sort of took a couple of breaths and sort of steadied myself and then quickly walked out.
There was a plan. And that plan basically revolved around the captain, Ranatunga, and one of his senior players, in this case, I think I'm right in saying it was Jayasuriya, who encroached on Emerson straight away. These two went in and they had to make him talk, because what the Sri Lankans were looking for was something to use in court. And this is how bad it had got. It got to a point now where the Sri Lankans were prepared to throw all the lawyers at this thing to make sure they kept this little champion spinner. That was the object of their exercise.
The Sri Lankans all walked off the field in what was clearly a preconceived action. They stood on the edge of the field.
Eventually, play resumed and the over was completed. Muralidharan immediately switched ends, insisting that umpire Emerson stand up close to the stumps. He bowled 5 more overs without another call of no ball. Graham Hick went on to make a brilliant 126 not out, and England finished on a daunting 302. When Sri Lanka lost 2 quick wickets, it took the explosive Sanat Jayasuriya to get them back on track.
That's a big hit. He moves to 50 in one of the most thrilling counter-attacks you'll ever see.
But the controversy wasn't over for the day, as Sri Lanka's new wonder kid, Mahela Jayawardene, who was starting to play a match-winning innings, had a lucky escape courtesy of the now flustered Emerson.
Good stop. Oh, there's all sorts of trouble here. Out. Not out. Well, I tell you what, how's he got back? He's run 2.
Well, Ross Emerson's having a big day, isn't he?
Got the technology here to ask the third umpire to have a look at it. I mean, it always looked as though it was going to be, I said, out on commentary live. And, I mean, he's a good... between 6 inches and a foot short. I mean, that is appalling.
I'm human. I didn't call for it. I should have. The replay showed that he was out and I didn't call for it. And, you know, Alex Stewart, who was the captain, actually came up and put his arm around me and said, it's pretty lonely out here by yourself, isn't it? You know, and he had a bit of a wry smile on his face.
The whole occasion got to him, you know, from the calling of Murali to then having his mind cluttered and forgetting what he was out there to do. So that created poor feelings amongst both sides.
Poor feelings that almost saw the game degenerate into a fight as a pumped-up and justifiably angry Darren Gough seemed to be on the point of headbutting Roshan Mahanama. And then, of course, there was Arjuna Ranatunga, the past master at winding people up, needling and niggling England.
Ranatunga is very clever. OK, he took Sri Lankan cricket to another level. So they've won the World Cup. They're a small island, passionate about the game. And he said, right, we're not going to be Mr. Nice Guys. We're going to play it tough. And we're going to push the laws, the spirit of the game to the limit. And at times they crossed it.
There were incidents, especially heat of the moment. There were incidents from both sides, not from one particular side. And generally I close the book as soon as the game is over.
We were at fault for biting as much as anything. We all push the game. You know, but you try and play within the spirit, even though you're always playing a win. You know, you don't have angels out there. It's a tough environment.
Inevitably, the final twist was that 9 wickets down, it was Murali that hit the winning runs.
It's in the air and he's done it. Mutiah Muralidharan scores the winning run to take Sri Lanka to the most incredible victory.
It left a bitter and sour taste in the mouth, no question about that. It seemed like a distracted game, you know, umpires distracted, players distracted, and it just got all a bit messy. And yeah, there was a few words exchanged, and it was in the end a great game in terms of 300 and something played 300 and something, and it was a great finish, etc. But it was an ugly game to be a part of.
Well, the game may have been over, but that, of course, was not the end of the affair. There had been any number of breaches of the ICC's then Code of Conduct, and that left the match referee Peter van der Merwe with the unenviable task of trying to sort it all out. Despite misdemeanours from both sides, only Ranatunga was called upon to answer charges. It immediately became clear that the hearing would be highly charged and political.
I wanted to report Ranatunga under the Code of Conduct. Peter van der Merwe wouldn't take the report at that stage, and I said to him, well, he's got to be reported tonight. He said, leave it with me, I'll seek some advice and I can take the report later.
And that was a mistake. The hearing was held 5 days later in Perth, where as the principal players in the drama convened, there were noisy demonstrations in support of Ranatunga. Inside the hearing, the Sri Lankan captain was flanked by a small army of lawyers that had been hired to defend him, and they quickly picked up on that procedural error.
We wanted to show the world something is wrong somewhere. That's the only message we wanted to give it to some people. Apart from that, we never wanted to stop playing cricket, or we never wanted to chuck up and go. Even there were politician called us after the game and said, if you all are not happy, just pack your bags and come home. And we didn't want that to happen. We said, no, it's one particular person. It's not the country, it's not the public, it's not the Australian public. It's one particular person.
He will be suspended for 6 one-day internationals, which again is the maximum. But that suspension will be suspended for a period of 12 months.
For many, it was an extraordinary decision which seemed to have let the Sri Lankan captain off extremely lightly. Arjuna Ranatunga played on for another 3 years before retiring and going into politics. And what of the other key figure in the incident, umpire Ross Emerson? Well, despite insisting to this day that the Australian board, through Bob Merriman, had wanted him to call Muralidharan, he was sacked and has never umpired again for them since.
He encouraged me to call him. He didn't talk about the integrity of the game or that I had to call him for throwing, but there's no doubt in my mind he encouraged me to call Murali for throwing. And then when they threatened to leave, it all comes back to a commercial decision. The Australian Cricket Board would have lost a lot of money if the Sri Lankans had gone home. Now, I don't know whether anybody believes that they really would have gone home, but I was expendable. No contract, no, nothing like that. Easy.
Let me just say this to you. There was something like maybe 10 or 12 umpires at that meeting in Sydney, together with 5 other people on the selection panel. There was a selection panel of 6, together with Tony Crafter, who was looking after the umpires, together with the general manager of cricket, all in the same room at that particular meeting when we outlined what was happening. and it appears only one person heard it differently, I have a real difficulty with that.
And what of the bigger picture? Well, once the dust had started to settle, the ICC knew they had to do something. For a start, their disciplinary code, now that lawyers were involved, was in tatters. That had to be sorted out. And then there was the question of Muralidharan and his action. The ICC knew that if they didn't do something about it, then there was a distinct possibility that the game could be split as regional politics took over.
I remember attending the ICC meeting, and I distinctly remember world being split in two parts. There was the Asian bloc and there was the Western bloc. And it was felt that Muralidharan and Sri Lankans were hard done by and unjustified in the way it was handled. And the Western world felt that there was a serious problem with his bowling action, and really it was a justified call by the umpire. So I still remember that there's a lot of friction between, you may want to call it, East and West.
Players were saying to us, we're going to challenge that decision of the umpires. And as soon as we realized that we needed to have some scientific evidence to back up a finding or a decision of the umpire. And we owed it to the players to do so.
The solution was to hand the problem back to the scientists. Muralidharan was sent to the biomechanics of the University of Western Australia. And they, after extensive research on other bowlers, proposed the 15-degree rule, which allows that degree of flexibility in an action. There was, though, a sense of outrage amongst many in the cricketing community at this rewriting of the laws.
They may have been, but I suspect that lots of people were tried and convicted of numerous crimes, etc., in days gone by where they possibly wouldn't have been convicted today. I think as long as what we tried to do actually was to make sure that we treat the modern player no more harshly than the old players. The introduction of levels of tolerance partly was to make sure that that didn't happen. So it wasn't a change from before, it was just an acknowledgement that the arm isn't a rigid piece of iron. It does straighten to a certain degree, and unless you get to degrees of in excess of 15, you're never going to be able to see them with the human eye, and we wanted to only catch those people who were straightening their arms beyond that point, not guys who because of some other kind of deficiency or trait in their action looked suspicious, but actually were straightening their arm less than the guy who looked as if he had a good action.
It was a decision and a change that generated much heated debate. And to this day, there are still those who remain convinced that the ICC has changed this most controversial law simply to accommodate one man.
How can you say? Because they are wrong. Because I can say some greatest bowlers came over me, like, 12 degrees, 13 degrees. ICC didn't publish that. So they kept it undercover.
Is the law right now? Are you happy with the law that we have?
Yeah, because the biomechanics says up till the 15 degrees, naked eye can't see. It's 15 degrees, not like bending and squaring. It's like just arm movement. It shows in the technology.
I think it has changed to accommodate one bowler. Because if the naked eye can pick up a kink in normal bowling action, then there's got to be some problem. I don't want to discuss the technical aspect of it and all that, but I think the rules were changed just because of one man.
I think the controversy at that time was all about Muralidharan's action, and the ICC felt the only way they could get around that was to change the rules or change the ruling to allow that 15-degree tolerance, which they felt that Muralidharan was within.
No, again, that's not correct. The fact was that Muralidharan was an example of someone who bowls with a bent arm all of the time, so his action looks suspect even if he doesn't straighten it 1 or 2 degrees. So he was the beneficiary of the change of rules, sure, but the rules weren't changed specifically to allow him to carry on bowling. The rules were changed to make sure that we didn't unfairly prejudice against him and turn a blind eye to bowlers who actually straightened their arm more, but because they had a more orthodox action, were allowed to get away with it.
What is not in doubt is that 12 years on from that ill-tempered Adelaide night, cricket has changed forever. Muralidharan's action not only prompted a rewriting of the laws, but also the record books, as he retired with 800 Test match wickets to his name, way ahead of anyone else.